Welcome to the Book Show, a celebration of reading and writers. I'm Joe Donahue. Wally Lamb, the best-selling author of She's Come Undone, and I Know This Much Is True, returns with his latest bestseller, The River Is Waiting, a deeply moving story of guilt, grief, and redemption. At its center is Corby Ledbetter, a struggling father whose life unravels after a devastating accident takes the life of his young son. As Corby serves time in prison, Lamb explores the emotional terrain of sorrow and the fragile hope for forgiveness. Known for his richly drawn characters and emotional insight, Wally delivers a novel that is heartbreaking and redemptive, drawing on his years of work with incarcerated people. This is Wally Lamb's third novel, selected as an Oprah Book Club pick. It is a great pleasure, before a live audience in Saratoga Springs, to welcome Wally Lamb to the Book Show.
Yeah, I don't know how I'm going to live up to this, but thank you, Joe, and thank you, everybody, for coming on this sultry day. I really appreciate it.
There's just a horrific beginning to this novel. I mean, it's heart-stopping. What is it like to start off that way? In other words, to have this huge cataclysmic event happen in the very beginning?
What Joe is referring to is an accident that's fairly more common than I had realized, a backover accident. I read about that in the newspaper, and usually it's a parent who's at the wheel, is backing up the car and doesn't realize that a small child is behind the car. That really freaked me out because at the time I had a grandson, a first grandkid who was a toddler. And I knew that my son Jared, his father, and his wife Brenna, they had an older car and did not have a backup camera. And I had just gotten a car with a backup camera. And so I remember being scared. So I called up Jared and I said, hey, I got this new car. If you fly up, you can drive it back and just take the car, okay? And he said, okay. And it made me feel better. But I was haunted, with that accident. And the statistic on that, it said that in the article said that 9 times out of 10, the child will survive more or less damaged. And then 1 time out of 10, the child does not survive. So that's where that started. And I often write about things that I'm afraid of.
It must be something to haunt you that way, to want to write about it, to want to explore it. I mean, it's not a passing thing where you say, oh, God, that sounds awful. I mean, it's really something that stays with you.
With me, it did, yeah.
Yeah. Writing about it, you do it in such it's a direct way, but it has empathy and it has feeling. You immediately feel for all the parties involved and the terror and the horror of that particular moment. But I would think that is a fine line to not make it overly graphic and to allow it to be what it is, which is an unspeakable tragedy.
Yeah. I went there and described the tragic event. I felt like I had to. In an earlier novel called The Hour I First Believed, I wrote about the Columbine tragedy.
Right.
And I went there too. I wrote a fiction based on the actual fact. And again, that was fear because in my research, I got very emotionally involved with the one teacher who had died in the shooting. He was shot and then he bled to death before, they got to rescue him. And, I had walked those high school corridors for 25 years, and I kind of imagined what it would be like if a shooter showed up on campus. And then I don't want to go too far into it, but when I was book touring with that book, I was very moved when I was in a town right next to Littleton, Colorado, and a man about halfway through the signing line put his book on the table and he said, do you think Eric's brother should read this book. And I was kind of confused. What do you mean? And then I realized it was the father of Eric Harris, one of the shooters. And I said, Mr. Harris, I've been working with this story for about 6 years, and I don't have any answers for you. And he said, and I don't have any answers for you either. And I put my hands out, and he grabbed my hands, and we just, squeezed each other's hands. And then I had 75 more people to sign books for, and I was like, it was tough, and I had to get over it when I got back to the hotel room.
But that says a lot about the type of book that you write and the situations that you will often write about, where these are normal people who are engaged in the normal duties of their day. When something horrible happens, you go to school, you're on your way to go to the store, whatever the case may be, and then something tragic happens. But imagine after having all this happen in that man's life, that there is a book out about a school shooting and not being, I assume, not being away from it enough that you have to find out more.
Yeah, I did a copious amount of research for that, so much so that people in that signing line were saying, when were you in town? We didn't. Nobody knew you were here when you were doing your research. And I said, I wasn't here, but I did a lot of homework on this, and I felt like I needed to.
Wally Lamb is our guest on this week's book show. The name of the new novel is The River is Waiting. When it comes to Corby Ledbetter and the story that you tell, as he goes to prison for 3 years, the way the book moves forward is you'll start with day 1, day 20, day 30, day 50, day 100, and move through. Did you come upon that quickly, of that passage of time, of how time would go? Because 3 years is a long time.
It is, and I have to thank my inmate students for that, because they've told me often enough that they count the days. They have calendars. For some reason, there's no Scotch tape that they can get in the commissary, so they use toothpaste on the back of a calendar, and it sticks to the wall. And many of them are, they'll cross off each day. And so I remember I was about halfway through a first draft, and I was getting kind of vague about how much time had passed. And so that's when I came up with that technique, and it helped sort of guide me through his sentence.
Because I would assume naturally, and the women that you worked with, I would think would feel this, that there's that moment at the beginning, and you're acclimating, and then you become part of the system, and then one day at some point you have to think, oh, there's going to be an end to this.
Yeah. And throughout the novel, Corby doesn't know what the end is going to be, because his wife has withheld forgiveness from him. I mean, it's understandable. I mean, she is still mourning, grieving the death of her son, and she's also so angry at Corby because he caused this because of his addiction, because he was drunk and had taken a few too many Ativan that morning when he kind of spaced out and did this. So, one of the things I try to ask the readers is what he did forgivable, or is it not? And I don't really care where people land on that, but is an act that a father commits so heinous that forgiveness is not possible, and that includes self-forgiveness.
I don't want to give a central plot point away, but I am interested in the idea where Corby has an opportunity, perhaps, we don't know for sure, of maybe a way out, and purposefully does not take it.
You're talking about a loophole.
A loophole.
That his attorney suggests that he might be able to use.
Okay, so you can give it away. I can't. Maybe. But,
it's in the first third of the book. Yeah.
But I wanted to know what that told you. Did you know, as you started it, that Corby would be that type of person that would say, I am going to pay for what I did, as opposed to try to, for want of a better term, weasel out?
Yeah. No, I didn't know until I was writing that scene. He's a couple of days after the accident. He drives. He's going to go see this lawyer for the first time, and then he drives to the river, which is that river is important in the story. And in the first scene, his first scene by the river, first of all, he goes to the casino, and he orders a drink, and he has started in AA before his imprisonment. And then he leaves the drink there, and he gets in the car. He doesn't know where he's going, but he doesn't want to go home, and so he drives to the river. I'll tell you that autobiographically, the sound and the sight of moving water has always been something that I love because I find it very soothing. Even when I'm in the shower, I get a lot of great ideas when I'm in the shower. But when I'm stuck with the writing, I will sometimes get a printout and go to either a lake or a brook or a stream, something like that, a waterfall, and just sit there, and it sort of makes things flow again. It calms me down and sometimes unsticks me. There are 3 river scenes in the book. The second one, Corby has been in prison for a while, and all this time he has heard the river, particularly the same river, and particularly that when it's quiet at night when everybody else is asleep, and then one day he's on the grounds crew, and one day he decides to commit a disobedience, and he runs to the river, even though he's not supposed to leave his post, and he grabs a handful of gravel, and from that he picks out a stone, and that stone becomes a kind of a talisman for him. It's a good luck stone, but it's also something that is going to help him abide as he counts down those days. And so there is a third river scene, which I won't tell you about. Yeah. So there were sort of 3 scenes, and that's kind of why I called the book "The River is Waiting."
Because from that, judge a book by its cover. You can't judge the book by this cover. You can't tell really what it's about at all.
Right. Actually, some people know this if they've read my other books. There's always a connection to a song in the titles that I come up with. And in this one, "The River is Waiting," some of you may remember a rock group called Creedence Clearwater Revival. Sure. And the lead singer and the writer of a lot of their songs is John Fogerty. And this is there is a John Fogerty song called "The River is Waiting." I first heard it performed by Irma Thomas at Jazz Fest in New Orleans, and I just loved it. I didn't think about calling the book "The River is Waiting," but then as I got more and more of the plot, I thought that was a fitting. But it was also a riddle for me, because it's like, okay, the river is waiting. What's it waiting for? Who's it waiting for? And I had to keep writing to answer that question for myself.
Wally Lamb is our guest. The name of the new novel is The River is Waiting. When it comes to the marriage and the forgiveness, the looking for forgiveness, the seeking of forgiveness, and not even knowing if he is worthy of that, the parts that really struck me were the phone calls, because some of the phone calls went okay. They started out all right, and then they weren't, or they were okay, and then the next time they were horrible. And that is just seems to be rather gut-wrenching, because I would assume the inmates have an idea of what they want that conversation to be, but also know of how fraught it could be.
Right, and he's particularly relying on the phone calls from his wife. Oh, well, he has to call, and then she either accepts the call or not, because she doesn't visit him very often. She finds that she can't bring herself to do that, so he relies on their conversations. But I can understand her resentment, because she's now a single parent, while her husband, who is responsible for the death of their son, he's primarily just warehoused for 3 years in a prison, while she has to scramble and go to all the meetings for, the teacher meetings for their daughter, and do the groceries, and she's a teacher, so she's got teacher responsibilities, and it's tough for her. It's tough for him to be just sort of waiting and counting down the days, and it's really tough for her because she's out there in the real world.
And also his daughter is growing up, and he sort of remembers her from that last point of what they bonded over and what they talked about and what they communicated about. And obviously that has moved on without him, but that's what he still is going back to.
Yeah, and Emily, his wife, she withholds the daughter from him. It's partly out of anger, I think, but also she doesn't feel it's appropriate to bring a child into a prison. It would be too scary for her. And so it's not until later in the novel that his mom brings their daughter into, her granddaughter, to see him. And she's hesitant. And he has a bushy beard at that point, and she vaguely remembers him. She was only 2, but she certainly doesn't remember him, with that beard, and so she's intimidated by him.
What is it like for you when you were doing it regularly to want to go to a prison to work with inmates?
I didn't want to do it, but I had 2 rides on the Oprah roller coaster. She chose the first novel, She's Come Undone, in 1997, and then she chose I Know This Much Is True when it just came out in 1998, and I would scratch my head and go, why has this happened to me when there are so many great writers out there? And I could never answer that, but I figured what I could do is give back. And so, my wife and I always, were, tried to be as charitable as we could, on teachers' salaries. But now I could write bigger checks thanks to Oprah, but that didn't fulfill me. And then karma sort of challenged me. I got a call from Margie Cohen, who was a childhood friend of mine, and she was now the librarian at York CI. And she said, Wally, we're in trouble down here. There have been cutbacks in psychiatric services. Our governor, John Rowland, was elected partly by a promise that when he's in charge of the state, those prisons are not going to be club meds, which was preposterous, but a lot of people liked hearing that. Anyway, good to his word, he was cutting back on support services. And so Margie said, there have been 2 suicides down here and some other attempts, and we're just trying to find something to distract the women. Can you come and talk about your work? And I said, I'm making a face when I'm on the phone with her. I'm like, okay. But I didn't particularly want to go, and I was intimidated. I get intimidated easily. But anyway, so I went down there. I thought I was going one time, 90 minutes. And at the end of that 90 minutes, the scariest woman in the room said, thanks for coming. And I said, oh, you're welcome. And she said, are you coming back? And I didn't know what else to say, and I didn't want her to hit me or anything. So I said, okay, I'll come back in 2 weeks. We'll have a workshop. You have to bring 2 pages of something, and then we'll do a critique thing. Well, at the first meeting there were about 40-something women. In the second one there were, I think, 9 or 10, because they had to write something, right? But those 9 or 10 women worked at it and worked at it and worked at it. So I kept coming back because they appreciated it, and then they began to appreciate what their writing was giving them. A lot of the women who are in prison and a lot of women who are out of prison carry terrible secrets from their childhood. I'm primarily talking about incest. And when the women began to trust me and then began to trust one another in this little group, that's when the writing really took off. It was very moving, and it helped them evolve. A lot of them really, they changed so much as a result of the writing, and not only the writing, but also the sharing of those secrets that they divulge in the writing. And then somebody else in the group says, yeah, that happened to me too. And then a third person says that. And what happens is, and I'm just the observer of this, they have created for themselves this oasis of safety and trust in the middle of a place where it's not a good idea to trust too many people.
Is there a way of not taking it home with you?
Yes. I had to work at that, though. And I'll be frank, Corby's addiction, he's addicted to benzodiazepine, an anti-anxiety drug that he didn't know was addictive. And then also he begins to over-rely on alcohol. And that's something that I did too. I was a late bloomer in terms of alcoholism. I was in my 50s when my drinking went from enthusiastic, I would say, to alcoholic. And so I knew what he was going through, to a certain extent, because I've been in those, and I still go to those church basement meetings, and it really, I was starting to go down a dark hole with this, and the people in this 12-step program helped to pull me out of it. And I've been very, very grateful that happened. I've been sober now for almost 15 years. And but you gotta watch it. You can't ever assume that's going to keep going.
So that came during fame.
Yeah, there were 3 things that sort of happened in my life that was just made it very painful for me. My mother and father were both elderly, and my mother was becoming senile. My father had Parkinson's, so his brain was fine, but his body was, not. And my mother's brain was not. So, and I was the go-to guy for them. So, I was driving down every day, every night time, to make sure that they were okay. And I had this book contract I think I had a 3-year deadline, which I blew right through. But also we had just adopted a nephew of ours. Biologically, he's a nephew. He's my wife's brother's kid, but his biological father and his biological mother were drunks and addicts, heroin addicts. And so we took him into our lives when he was 4. And, we had 2 kids of our own. And we thought, okay, we can love him and keep him safe, and he'll be okay. Well, that was naive of us, because he had had 4 years of imprinting with some pretty dark and scary stuff. And so he rewrote all the rules of parenting for us, and it was not easy. And he ended up in prison and with drug problems, and he's out now for a couple of years now, and is kind of limping along in life.
Are you in touch?
Yeah, oh yeah. But we don't, he can't live with us, but we see him about once every couple of weeks.
So those are really dark places. Do you feel that you gravitate to those because that's natural for you, or do you gravitate to them because it's important for those stories to be told?
I had a good life. I have had a good life. I had a good childhood. I didn't have any of these traumatic things happen to me when I was a kid. But when I was 21, I bounced out of the University of Connecticut and went back to the high school where I had been a student. And I think that was probably the first time, when I think about it, that I saw and I observed that not all of the teenagers that I worked with had the fortunate life that I had had. And I think that's what sort of opened me up to empathy. Not sympathy, but I began to see, imagine what that life would be like.
Wally Lamb's new novel is The River is Waiting. It is published by Simon & Schuster. Thanks to our producer, Sarah LeDuc, our engineer, Nate Scheid, and to the staff and crew at Northshire Bookstore. Special thanks to Rachel Person, northshire.com. Write to us at book@wamc.org. The latest on National Productions programs is available via the Airwaves newsletter at wamc.org and on social media at WAMC Radio. Please join me in thanking the incredible Wally Lamb. Bookmark us for next week. Thanks for listening. I'm Joe Donahue.